1. Trump's rage and rise. Everyone thought Donald Trump was finished after his first chaotic term. Too many scandals, too many enemies, too much baggage. The pundits wrote him off. But then the rallies came back. Packed stadiums, roaring crowds, people waiting hours in the cold just to see him speak. And suddenly it was clear, Trump wasn't done. He was stronger than ever. And then came the assassination attempt. Trump was shot, but he not only survived, he stood up with defiance. To MAGA, it was nothing less than divine, proof that God had blessed Trump. In that moment, political loyalty became faith. But where does this rage and devotion really come from? Not just culture wars, not just anger at Washington elites. It comes from pain, deep economic pain. Pain that hollowed out entire towns in the Rust Belt. Pain that destroyed factories, stripped away livelihoods, and left communities in despair. 2. Quick summary for busy viewer. So here's the quick summary, if you only have a minute. Trump's rise wasn't random. It was born out of the pain of the American worker. Globalization lifted millions in Asia, made the richest 1% richer than ever, but left America's middle behind. The famous elephant graph explains it. China and immigrants are the wrong scapegoats. They actually kept life affordable with low price, high-quality consumer goods. The real big winners were billionaires, like the heirs to Walmart and titans of Amazon. And Trump's tariffs and crackdowns? They only made things worse, ripping away the low-cost benefits without bringing the jobs back. The real solution isn't closing off America. It's redistributing some of the enormous gains at the very top, and investing them into healthcare, education, and retraining for the bottom half. Before we dive in, if you appreciate calm, clear breakdowns of big global plays, hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your take. 3. The first China shock. Now let's slow down and see how this pain began. Economists call it the China shock, after China's entry into the WTO in 2001. Take Hickory, North Carolina. Once the proud furniture capital of America. For decades, factories there built solid wood tables and chairs that filled American homes. Generations worked in these plants, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. Towns thrived. But when ultra-cheap imports from China surged in the 2000s, everything changed. One by one, the furniture factories shut down. The jobs vanished. No matter how hard you worked, American workers could not compete with China paying its poor peasant workers only $1 a day in the 1990s, with no environmental protections. A way of life disappeared almost overnight. And Hickory wasn't alone. Across the Midwest and South, entire towns felt the same shock. Studies estimate the China shock wiped out more than 2 million American manufacturing jobs. To the people who lived through it, it felt like a betrayal. One day you had a steady job, the next day your factory was padlocked and your skills were worthless. 4. Deaths of despair. But the worst part wasn't just the lost paychecks. It was the hopelessness that followed. Economists call it deaths of despair. When the jobs left, despair set in. Alcoholism spiked, drug overdoses soared, suicides climbed. In the Rust Belt, for the first time in modern history, life expectancy actually went down, not up. Communities that once built America's prosperity were now burying their own in record numbers. And this despair fueled anger. Anger at elites, anger at politicians, anger at globalization, and anger at the system itself. That anger found a voice in Donald Trump. 5. The big question. So why did this happen? Why did globalization lift up some people but crush others? Why did towns in China boom while towns in Ohio or Michigan collapsed? The answer is hidden in one simple but powerful chart. Economists call it the elephant graph. And if you've never seen it before, once you do, you'll never forget it. 6. Johnny Harris recap. Journalist Johnny Harris explained the elephant graph brilliantly a few years ago. The following is from his own YouTube channel, How China Became So Powerful, which is linked in the description. I highly recommend checking out his original video and other content.
It's called the elephant graph. Do you sort of see why? Let's deconstruct this graph and try to understand what this says about the past 30 years of the rise of China. On this axis is everyone on Earth, ranked by their income, grouped into percentiles. So these people down here make an income that is the 10th percentile, the lowest 10% in the world, and then the 20th percentile, and so on, up to these people up here who are the richest in the world. They have an income that puts them in the 90th percentile. This axis here shows how much growth in income these people have had over the past 35 years. Basically during the heyday of shareholder capitalism and the rise of China. So you'll see how this plays out in just a second. Let's start plotting how much income growth each of these groups saw over the past 35 years. The bottom 10% saw their incomes grow by around 75%. Not bad. These are people who live in the poorest countries, who make the lowest income in the world. The 20 to 30 percentile saw huge growth in their income, 125% and more over the past 35 years. This is like the new middle class in China and other Asian countries who saw huge income growth due to globalization. They did really well under this system. But then you start to get to the people in the 50th and 60th and 70th and 80th percentile. This is basically people who live in the middle class in the West. Their incomes have grown much slower, sometimes under 50% over the course of 35 years, which is little over 1% a year. Not very much income growth. And some of these people in the West have seen their incomes shrink, like the blue-collar workers in Detroit and the Rust Belt whose jobs disappeared to China. So far you can sort of see why this makes sense. The people in China who benefited from this mass industrialization saw huge benefits. And the people here in the United States and in the West who saw jobs go overseas to China saw a way slower growth in their income. But watch what happens next when we get to the groups of people who are at the 99 percentile, basically the richest 1% in the world. And for this, I actually have to stretch out the graph to get us a little bit more granular. These are the people who have the highest incomes in the world. Let's see how their income has grown over the past 35 years. You can see that their income has exploded under this system. They're seeing tripling of their income in the past 35 years. Now, a reminder that this is 35 years of data from every economy on Earth. This shows everyone on the planet. So this gives us a view of who are the winners and the losers of this shareholder capitalism that has globalized to Asia and around the world.
7. Deeper dive. The original paper. But here's what most people don't know. When I dug into the original World Bank study, I found that there isn't just one elephant graph, there are two. The first, figure 1A, is the famous one. It shows percentage growth. It confirms exactly what Johnny Harris showed. Asia's middle, in China, the four little tigers and the four little dragons, rose. The Western middle stagnated, the American Rust Belt busted. But the top 1% exploded. It looks dramatic, and it is. 8. The missing piece. But then there's figure 1D. This one doesn't measure percentages. It measures total income gains in 2005 US dollars, the actual dollars people added to their lives. And suddenly, the picture snaps into focus. Look at the y-axis. The income gain is on a log scale, which means the top end is far bigger than the bottom. It isn't linear. China's workers. Yes, China's workers gained. Hundreds of millions climbed out of poverty. But in dollar terms, their rise was still below the global average line, less than $125 per person per year. And their top gain, even at the peak, was only about 0.5% of the $25,000 the US top 1% pocketed over the same period. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Globalization didn't just build China, it built billionaires. The pain of the Rust Belt wasn't caused by Beijing stealing jobs. It was caused by Wall Street and the global elite capturing the huge gains of globalization. The four little tigers. Now look at the blue section. The so-called four little tigers. Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Yes, their workers gained more than China's. Incomes rose a few $100s. But in total dollars, they too stayed below the global average and far below what the Western elite walked away with. So just like China, the story here isn't that Southeast Asia stole American prosperity. The truth is simpler. Ordinary workers in Asia and America both got scraps, while the global 1% feasted. The Four Little Dragons. Now shift your eyes to the gray section. The Four Little Dragons. Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, and Taiwan. Unlike China or the tigers, their workers actually managed to stay around or just above the global average line. That's why these economies advanced. With corporate giants like TSMC and Samsung, they gained more in absolute dollars, not just percentages. But even here, the scale is modest. A Korean or Taiwanese worker might have gained another $1,000 or $2,000. Meanwhile, America's top 1% was adding $20,000 or more every single year. So yes, the four dragons climbed higher than China or the tigers, but compared to the global elite, even their success looks small. Western workers, the Rust Belt, and then we hit the deep dip, around the 80th percentile. That's workers in the West. America's Rust Belt, Europe's industrial towns, Japan's middle class, the lost 30 years. While China's workers gained, while the tigers and dragons climbed, Western workers actually fell behind in absolute dollar terms. They are the only major group in the entire world whose incomes barely moved, or even declined. So when people say, China stole American jobs, the real story is here. It wasn't Chinese workers who won at the expense of the West. It was the global 1% who took all the gains, while Western workers paid the steepest price. They weren't just left out. They were the biggest losers of globalization. The final winner, the top 1%, and finally, look to the far right. The only group whose gains soar far above the global average, by tens of thousands of dollars each year, is the top 1%. Western workers lost. China's workers gained a little. The tigers gained a little more. The dragons did better, but the top 1% captured more than everyone else combined. They weren't just winners of globalization. They were the sole, runaway winners. And that is the missing piece of the elephant graph. That's the real culprit, not Chinese workers, not immigrants, but the way the system was designed, funneling the vast majority of new wealth upward, leaving the middle to fight over scraps. And the Rust Belt was hit the hardest. Rust Belt workers sank even lower than their peers in the West, and that's why so many rolled the dice on a figurehead with shaky promises. 9. Why Trump is wrong. But Trump told Rust Belt workers their enemies were China and immigrants. And that message stuck because it felt real. They saw Chinese imports in Walmart. They saw immigrants working in local factories. But here's the irony. Those imports and those immigrants actually gave Rust Belt families their only benefit from globalization. They kept prices low. They kept life affordable. They gave struggling families access to cheaper food, clothing, electronics. Trump's tariffs and anti-immigrant crusade ripped away that one lifeline. Prices shot up. Jobs didn't return. The pain only got worse. 10. The real solution. So what's the real solution? Not walls. Not tariffs. Not trade wars. The real solution is to take a fraction of the enormous gains at the very top, and reinvest them in the bottom half. That means real retraining programs, not empty promises. It means healthcare that doesn't bankrupt families. It means education that equips people for the future instead of chaining them with debt. This isn't socialism. It's capitalism that works for everyone, not just the top 1%. 11. Wrap up. Moral. So yes, China rose. But the elephant graph shows us something deeper. It explains why Trump rose too. Globalization created winners and losers. It lifted Asia. It enriched billionaires. And it crushed America's middle. If we keep blaming the wrong targets, the despair will only grow. But if we face the real culprit, the unequal distribution of gains, then maybe, just maybe, we can rebuild the middle of America before it's too late. 12. Final. If this gave you something to think about, hit like and subscribe. And drop a comment. What do you think we should do to help the Rust Belt? See you next time, on Twin Peaks Bridge Reflection.